Our first story takes place in a small roadside diner in the middle of nowhere. For years it had been a popular stop for truck drivers, night owls, and anyone looking for a quick bite on long road trips. But one fateful night, a series of strange events turned this quaint diner into the setting of a nightmare. Betty had worked the late-night shift at the diner for over 20 years. She knew the regulars, the late-night crowd, and the occasional drifters passing through. But on this particular night, something felt different. Outside, a heavy fog had settled over the highway, making it nearly impossible to see anything beyond the diner's parking lot. The customers had thinned out, leaving Betty alone with just one or two stragglers sipping coffee in the back corner. Then, just after midnight, the door creaked open. A man walked in, dressed in a long coat, his face obscured by shadows. He sat in the farthest booth, not saying a word. Betty thought nothing of it. After all, strange characters were common at this hour. But when she went over to take his order, he simply pointed to the menu without speaking, his finger shaking slightly. Betty wrote down the order and returned to the kitchen. But when she handed the order slip to the cook, something strange happened. The cook, a grizzled old man named Frank, turned pale as soon as he read it.
This order, we stopped serving this years ago.
What are you talking about? It's just a regular meal.
The order the man had placed was for an item that had been removed from the menu a decade ago, a specialty sandwich that only a few of the diner's oldest customers would even remember. Frank reluctantly agreed to make the sandwich, muttering about how strange it was. Betty delivered the meal to the man, but when she set the plate down, he didn't touch it. Instead, he continued to sit there motionless, staring ahead as if he were in a trance. Hours passed. The man never ate, never spoke, and didn't leave. Betty began to feel increasingly uneasy. She approached the booth to check on him, but as she reached out to tap his shoulder, something terrifying happened. His skin was ice cold, his eyes vacant and lifeless. Betty stumbled backwards, screaming for Frank, but when they turned back to the booth, the man was gone. There were no footsteps, no sound of the door opening or closing, just an empty booth and a plate of untouched food. Shaken, Betty and Frank searched the diner, but the man had vanished without a trace. The next morning, Betty and Frank tried to explain what had happened, but no one believed them. There were no security cameras in the diner and no other witnesses. But what made the incident even stranger was what they found later that day. An old photo tucked behind one of the counters. The photo was decades old, but the man in it looked exactly like the one who had disappeared the night before. Betty and Frank were left with more questions than answers, haunted by the possibility that they had served a ghost that night. Story 2. Rosa's Family Restaurant had been a local favorite for years. Run by the same family for generations, it was known for its hearty meals, warm atmosphere, and loyal customers. But hidden behind its welcoming exterior was a dark, disturbing history, one that would soon resurface with terrifying consequences. Rosa had taken over the restaurant from her parents, continuing the family tradition with pride. But not long after reopening the restaurant following renovations, strange things began to happen. It started small, dishes going missing, strange noises coming from the kitchen at night, but soon things escalated. One night after closing, Rosa was alone in the kitchen when she heard it. A child's laughter, faint but unmistakable, coming from the dining area. At first she thought it was her imagination, but as the nights went on, the laughter grew louder, more persistent. Unable to explain what was happening, Rosa began to investigate. She learned that decades earlier, a tragedy had occurred in the restaurant. A young boy had died in the kitchen under mysterious circumstances, and his spirit was rumored to still haunt the building. The boy had been the son of one of the original owners, and some said he had never truly left the place he had grown up in. Rosa tried to dismiss the rumors, but the activity only grew worse. Staff began to report seeing a small figure darting between tables, hearing footsteps in the kitchen when no one was there, and feeling a cold presence in the dining room. One night, things reached a terrifying climax. Rosa was locking up after a busy night when she saw it, a small figure standing at the far end of the dining room. At first she thought it was a customer who had been left behind, but as she walked closer, her heart froze. The figure slowly turned to face her, revealing the pale, ghostly face of a young boy. His eyes were empty, and his lips curled into a chilling smile. Rosa ran, slamming the door behind her, but the image of the boy haunted her for weeks. Desperate, Rosa sought the help of a local priest who performed a blessing on the restaurant. For a while, the activity seemed to calm down. But some say the boy never truly left. To this day, employees and patrons still report strange occurrences. Cold spots, disembodied laughter, and even sightings of the young boy roaming the halls late at night. Some believe his spirit remains trapped in the place he once called home and that he continues to watch over the restaurant in his own haunting way. Story 3. Our final story takes us to a high-end restaurant with a long and storied past. Built over 100 years ago, this restaurant had become a staple of the city, known for its luxurious ambiance and gourmet dishes. But beneath its polished surface was a dark secret, one that had been buried deep within its walls. The basement of the restaurant was used for storage, wine, dry goods, and supplies. But over the years it had gained a reputation among staff for being unnervingly creepy. Employees would often complain about the feeling of being watched, strange noises and shadows that seemed to move on their own. Most of them avoided going down there alone. One night, a server named Mark was sent down to the basement to retrieve a case of wine. It was near closing time and the restaurant was mostly empty, save for a few lingering customers. As Mark descended the stairs, he immediately felt the familiar chill, a cold, oppressive air that seemed to cling to the walls. Mark had always been skeptical of the stories about the basement. He didn't believe in ghosts, and he had never personally experienced anything strange. Until that night, Mark whispering to himself, "Probably just the pipes." But as he grabbed the case of wine and turned to leave, something caught his eye. A figure standing just at the edge of the shadows. It was barely visible, but it was there. At first he thought it was one of his co-workers playing a prank, but as he stepped closer, the figure didn't move. It stood there, unnaturally still, its features hidden in darkness. Mark called out, but there was no response. Mark's heart raced as he backed away, his mind struggling to make sense of what he was seeing. Then, without warning, the figure disappeared, vanishing into the darkness as if it had never been there. Mark fled the basement, terrified and shaken. He refused to go back down there, and when he told his co-workers what had happened, he was met with knowing looks. He wasn't the first to see the figure in the basement, and he wouldn't be the last. Staff member 1. I always got this really bad feeling down there, like someone was watching me. I tried to ignore it, but after a while it became too much. I stopped going down there alone. Staff member 2. I saw it once. A tall, dark figure just standing there, not moving. I didn't stick around to see what it was. I ran upstairs and never looked back. Over the years, many employees reported seeing the same figure, tall, dark, and silent. Some believed it was the spirit of a former worker who had died in the basement decades earlier, while others thought it was something far more malevolent. The restaurant's history held many secrets, including the tragic death of a young worker who had mysteriously died in the basement many years ago. Some say his spirit still lingers, trapped in the dark corridors of the basement, unable to move on. To this day, employees refuse to enter the basement alone. Some say they still hear footsteps in the darkness, feel cold drafts, and catch glimpses of the shadowy figure lurking just out of sight. Whether it's the restless spirit of a former worker or something more sinister, one thing is certain: the basement holds a darkness that no one dares to confront. Restaurants may seem like places of comfort and familiarity, but beneath the surface, some of them hide terrifying secrets. Whether it's a ghostly figure lurking in the shadows, an old tragedy that refuses to be forgotten, or a mysterious customer who vanishes without a trace, these stories remind us that even in the most ordinary of places, horror can still strike. So the next time you dine out, take a moment to look around. You never know what unseen horrors might be watching, waiting. Like, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more chilling tales.